The battlefield was silent, too silent. Commander Yelrin of the Zerithian Defense Fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Vathos, staring at the empty void of space ahead. He knew the silence wouldn't last. The Tarvok Empire was never silent for long. Around him, his officers worked in tense silence, their faces pale with exhaustion. They had been fighting for 6 months straight. The Zerithian fleet had started with hundreds of ships. Now, only a handful remained. The enemy had wiped out entire planets, reducing civilizations to dust. They showed no mercy, no hesitation. And now, they were coming here. Yelrin turned to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Orcs. Status report. Orcs hesitated. He didn't want to say it, but Yelrin needed the truth. "Sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "No reinforcements, no supplies, no escape routes." Yelrin clenched his jaw. He had known the answer, but hearing it still hurt. They were alone. Suddenly, a shrill alarm pierced the air. "Incoming enemy fleet," a technician cried. "Sarvok dreadnoughts on approach. Estimated arrival, 10 minutes." Panic spread through the bridge like wildfire. Officers whispered among themselves. Some looked ready to abandon their posts. Yelrin slammed his fist on the console. "Enough," he shouted. "We hold the line. We fight." The crew stiffened, but no one spoke. They all knew the truth. There was no winning this battle. A warship 30 times the size of their strongest cruiser was heading straight for them, leading an entire fleet of destroyers and fighters. The Zerithians' weapons were running low on power. Their shields were at half strength. And yet Yelrin would not surrender. The Sarvok didn't accept surrender. They only accepted annihilation. He took a deep breath and prepared to give his final orders when a new transmission cut through the fleet's frequency. A deep, unfamiliar voice spoke. "Zerithian fleet, do you copy?" Yelrin's brow furrowed. This voice. He didn't recognize it. It wasn't Tarvok. It wasn't any known ally. "This is Commander Yelrin," he responded. "Identify yourself." A short pause. Then, "This is Commander Elias Voss of the United Human Fleet. We're inbound to assist. Hold the line." The bridge went dead silent. "Humans," Lieutenant Orcs whispered in disbelief. Everyone knew about humans. They were newcomers to the galactic scene. They weren't a major power. Their technology was decent, but not superior. They weren't part of the war. Why would they help? Orcs stepped closer to Yelrin and whispered, "Sir, do they even understand what they're getting into? The Tarvok will tear them apart." Yelrin wanted to believe in miracles, but he wasn't foolish. Humanity's fleet was small, and the Tarvok were unstoppable. He activated the comms. "Commander Voss," Yelrin said carefully, "appreciate the offer, but this fight is already lost. If you value your people, turn back now." Voss's reply came instantly. "Lost? Not yet. Sit tight, Commander. Humanity is coming." Yelrin frowned. Why were they so confident? Before he could argue further, the Sarvok dreadnought emerged from hyperspace, a monstrous war machine covered in pulsating red energy. Behind it, a fleet of over 50 warships followed. The Zerithian officers stopped breathing. This was it. The end. And then, boom, a shockwave ripped through space, cutting across the Sarvok formation. Then another explosion. And another. Suddenly, the enemy fleet was in chaos. Sarvok ships veered off course, their shields failing. Small, fast-moving objects darted between them, unleashing devastating firepower. Yelrin's eyes widened. Human ships. They weren't massive like Zerithian or Sarvok warships. They weren't built for brute force. But they were fast, unpredictable, relentless. The Sarvok fleet had fought countless enemies, but they had never fought humans before. And the humans were winning. On the bridge of the Vathos, Yelrin and his crew stared in stunned silence. Orcs muttered, "Impossible." Yelrin turned to the comms officer. "Get me Voss. Now." A second later, the human commander's voice returned. "Hope you don't mind, Commander," Voss said, almost casually. "Figured we'd crash the party." Yelrin exhaled sharply. He hadn't felt this in months. Hope. For the first time since the war began, they weren't alone. The humans had arrived. The HFY dreadnought, a massive, monstrous warship, loomed over the battlefield like a dark god. It was nearly 30 times the size of the biggest Zerithian cruiser. Its glowing red cannons hummed with deadly energy, preparing to fire a shot that could wipe out an entire fleet. The Zerithians had seen this before. They had witnessed countless planets fall. They had watched their strongest warriors get crushed by the overwhelming might of the HFY Empire. And yet, something was different this time. The humans were here. Commander Yelrin gripped his console, watching the battle unfold on the holographic screen. He could barely believe his own eyes. The small, sleek human ships zipped between the enemy warships with unbelievable speed. Unlike Zerithian vessels, which relied on shields and heavy armor, the humans relied on maneuverability, strategy, and sheer audacity. A squadron of 5 human corvettes darted around a HFY destroyer, dodging its turrets and firing pinpoint-accurate blasts at its weak points. In less than a minute, the destroyer exploded. Another group of human fighters weaved through enemy ranks, dropping timed explosives in their paths. Before the HFY commanders could react, their own ships collided into deadly fire traps. Lieutenant Orcs, standing beside Yelrin, shook his head in disbelief. This isn't possible," Orcs muttered. "Humans, they're making the HFY look like fools." Yelrin felt the same disbelief. The HFY were ruthless, brutal warriors, feared across the galaxy. No species had ever fought them and won. Yet these humans, who weren't even part of the war a few months ago, were pushing them back. Yelrin's comms officer turned to him. "Sir, Commander Voss is hailing us." "Put him through." A moment later, the gruff, confident voice of Commander Elias Voss filled the bridge. "Commander Yelrin," Voss said, "I suggest you join the fight instead of just watching." Yelrin narrowed his eyes. "We don't have enough firepower to—" "Oh, I know," Voss interrupted. "You don't have the firepower to win. But we don't need brute force. We need strategy." Yelrin frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Voss chuckled. "Simple. We set a trap." The human plan. The HFY fleet was big, far too big to maneuver quickly. It relied on overwhelming force to crush its enemies. But humans fought dirty. Voss's plan was unconventional, risky, and borderline insane, which meant it might actually work. They would lure the HFY dreadnought into a dead zone, an area where the battlefield debris would interfere with its targeting systems. Then, human and Zerithian ships would strike from multiple angles, using their speed and coordination to cripple its engines. If they could disable the dreadnought, the entire enemy fleet would fall into disarray. Yelrin hesitated. This kind of high-speed attack went against everything the Zerithians were taught. They were a defensive species. They fought with caution and discipline. But humans fought with reckless courage, and they won because of it. Yelrin turned to his officers. "Prepare the fleet. We fight." The battle begins. The plan went into motion immediately. Human and Zerithian ships retreated toward the debris field, pretending to be in full retreat. The HFY, seeing this as an easy kill, pursued without hesitation. The massive dreadnought followed, its cannons charging. And then, the trap sprang shut. From the shadows of the debris, human and Zerithian ships launched a coordinated counterattack. Human fighters swarmed the dreadnought's engines, firing precision shots at its exhaust vents and shield generators. Zerithian cruisers, using their last bit of energy, focused their cannons on a single weak point. Boom! The dreadnought shuddered, its shields flickering. Inside the Tarvok command center, their warlord roared in anger. Impossible. These are just humans. But it was too late. Commander Voss's flagship, the UHS Invictus, charged forward, firing a final torpedo straight into the dreadnought's engine core. The explosion lit up the battlefield like a second sun. Victory. For now. The shockwave rippled through the enemy fleet. Tarvok ships hesitated, something they had never done before. Fear crept into their ranks. And then, something even more shocking happened. The Tarvok began retreating. The species that had never backed down in history was now falling back, fleeing into hyperspace. Silence filled the Zerithian bridge. Every officer was frozen in place, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. The impossible had happened. The humans had won. Lieutenant Orcs turned to Yelren, eyes wide. "Sir, they're running. The Tarvok are actually running." Commander Yelren exhaled, his chest feeling lighter than it had in months. He pressed the comms button. "Commander Voss," he said, "I believe we owe you our gratitude." Voss laughed. "Don't thank me yet. This war isn't over." Yelren nodded. "No, but for the first time, we have hope." Far across the battlefield, the last human fighter jets soared past the wreckage of the defeated enemy fleet, their engines leaving behind a trail of victory. The universe had changed today, and humanity had just begun. The battle was over. For now. The Tarvok dreadnought was nothing more than floating debris, and their fleet had retreated into the void. For the first time in 6 months, the Zerithians had won a battle. But the real question remained: how? Commander Yelren stood on the bridge of the Vathos, staring at the aftermath on the holographic screen. His officers were silent, trying to process what had just happened. Nobody had ever made the Tarvok retreat before. And then there were the humans. Their small fleet, their unorthodox tactics, and their reckless courage had changed the course of the war in a single day. Lieutenant Orcs shook his head. "Sir, I still don't understand. How did they do it?" Yelren exhaled. "I don't know, Orcs, but I intend to find out." The comms officer turned. "Commander, incoming transmission from the human flagship, UHS Invictus." "Put it through." A moment later, the gruff, confident voice of Commander Elias Voss filled the bridge. "That was fun, huh?" Voss said casually. Yelren narrowed his eyes. "You call that fun? We barely survived." Voss chuckled. "Barely surviving is kind of our thing." Yelren glanced at his officers. "You humans, you don't fight like any other species." "Yeah," Voss replied. "That's why we win." The human way of war. The two commanders met in a holographic strategy meeting. The Zerithian officers sat on one side, cautious and formal. The humans sat on the other, relaxed and confident. Commander Yelren crossed his arms. "The Tarvok have overwhelmed every species with their power. What makes humans different?" Voss smirked. "Simple. We don't fight fair." The Zerithians exchanged confused looks. "Your people fight by the rules," Voss continued. "You believe in honor, in strategy, in careful planning. You try to match the enemy's strength." Yelren nodded. "That is the way of war." Voss leaned forward. "Not for us. We don't match the enemy's strength. We attack their weakness." Yelren frowned. "And what is the Tarvok's weakness?" Voss grinned. "They think they can't lose." Silence filled the room. Voss continued. "The Tarvok have never been challenged before. They fight like bullies. Brute force, no strategy. But humans, we've been fighting wars since before we reached the stars. And we never stop adapting." Yelren studied the human commander. "What are you suggesting?" Voss smirked. "Simple. We take the fight to them." The next battle. The humans didn't believe in waiting for the next attack. They wanted to strike first, something the Zerithians had never considered. Yelren hesitated. "You want to go on the offensive? That's suicide." Voss grinned. "Not if we do it the human way." He pulled up a holographic map. The Xarvok have a forward supply station 2 systems away. It's lightly guarded because they think we're too weak to attack. We hit them first. The Zerithian officers murmured among themselves. This is madness, Orcs whispered. They'll kill us all. But Yelrin wasn't so sure anymore. These humans had turned the tide of battle in a single day. They had done what no other species had done. And most importantly, they had shown him what true resilience looked like. Yelrin looked at Voss. If we do this, how do we win? Voss's grin widened. Simple. We make them afraid. The plan. Humans didn't fight like Zerithians. Instead of a large-scale attack, they suggested stealth, deception, and sabotage. 3 things that Xarvok were not prepared for. The plan was simple but dangerous. A small strike team would infiltrate the Xarvok supply station. They would disable key systems, causing chaos in the station. Meanwhile, the human fleet would arrive from the opposite side, making it look like a full-scale invasion. The Xarvok, panicked and disoriented, would retreat or surrender before realizing the truth. Orvix's jaw dropped. You're suggesting we trick them into running. Voss smirked. We don't have to destroy them. We just have to make them think they're already beaten. Yelrin exhaled. The plan was bold, risky, but if it worked. He stood up. We do it. Prepare the fleet. The human effect. As the meeting ended, Orvix pulled Yelrin aside. Sir, are we really going to follow the humans into battle? Yelrin looked at his lieutenant. We don't have a choice, Orvix. We lost this war the moment the Xarvok invaded. He glanced at the human commander, who was casually laughing with his officers, as if this was just another day for them. But these humans, Yelrin said, they don't know how to lose. Orvix frowned. And if this plan fails? Yelrin gave a small smile. Then at least we'll go down fighting like them. Across the room, Voss clapped his hands. All right, folks. Time to show the Xarvok why messing with humanity is a bad idea. As the humans and Zerithians moved to prepare for battle, a single thought filled the air. The war wasn't over. It was just getting started. The Xarvok supply station floated silently in the void, its massive metal structure glowing under the light of a distant star. It was a vital hub, controlling the movement of weapons, fuel, and reinforcements for the enemy fleet. For the Xarvok, it was just another fortress, unbreakable, unstoppable, protected by automated defenses and elite guards. But they had made one mistake. They thought no one would dare attack it. They had never faced humans before. A dangerous plan. Commander Yelrin stood aboard the Zerithian flagship, the Vathos, staring at the holographic map of the target. His officers murmured nervously, still unsure about this mission. The human leader, Commander Elias Voss, was standing with his arms crossed, a confident smirk on his face. Yelrin turned to him. Are you sure about this? If we fail, we lose everything. Voss shrugged. If we sit here and do nothing, we lose everything anyway. Might as well take a shot, right? Orvix, Yelrin's second-in-command, frowned. This is not how we fight. We prefer direct combat. Voss chuckled. Yeah, that's why you keep losing. Yelrin sighed. Explain the plan one more time. Voss pointed at the map. The Xarvok supply station is heavily guarded, but their defenses are built for big attacks, not small ones. So, we don't attack with a fleet. He tapped the screen, zooming in. We send a small infiltration team to disable their defenses from the inside. Then, while they're in chaos, we launch a fake full-scale assault to scare them into retreating or surrendering. Orvix raised an eyebrow. And who will lead the infiltration? Voss grinned. Who else? Humans. The infiltration begins. A small human strike team, consisting of 5 elite operatives, approached the station in a stealth shuttle. Inside, Sergeant Logan Pierce, a hardened soldier with a scar across his cheek, checked his weapons. Remember the mission. Get in, shut down their systems, and get out before they know what hit them. His team nodded silently, their faces serious. As they neared the station's outer docking bay, their ship's AI beeped. Pierce spoke into his comms. "Command, we're in position. Beginning infiltration." Voss's voice crackled back. "Copy that. Don't die, all right." Pierce smirked. "No promises." Inside enemy territory, the humans moved like shadows, sneaking past patrolling Sarvok guards. The enemy was big, strong, and brutal, but not careful. Pierce's team reached the main control room and hacked into the security system. "All right," whispered one of the operatives, typing on a holographic console, disabling long-range communications. Now, a small red light flickered off on the station's command deck. The Xarvok didn't even notice. Now shutting down automated turrets. Another light blinked off. Pierce checked his watch. 2 minutes until the attack starts. But just as they were about to finish, the door slammed open. A Xarvok commander stormed in, eyes glowing with rage. Into ears. The alarm blared. All hell breaks loose. Pierce and his team opened fire, cutting down the guards, but the damage was done. The station was now on high alert. Pierce growled, "We're out of time. Let's move." Back on the Vathos, Yelrin's officers panicked. "The humans have been discovered," Orvik shouted. "The mission is compromised." But Voss smiled. "Perfect," he said. "Let's make them panic." The fake attack begins. The human and Zerithian fleet jumped into the system, their weapons glowing menacingly. From the Xarvok's point of view, it looked like a full-scale invasion. Their sensors, now blinded by the sabotage team, only detected massive energy signals 10 times stronger than reality. The Xarvok commander on the station screamed into his communicator, "We are under attack. Enemy forces are everywhere." In truth, there were only a few dozen ships. But the Xarvok didn't know that. They were afraid, and humans knew how to use fear. The tide turns. Inside the station, Pierce's team fought their way to the escape pods. Pierce shouted into his comms, "Command, we need an exit." Voss's voice came through instantly. "Hold tight, kid. Extraction inbound." At that moment, a human stealth ship decloaked, firing precise shots at the enemy. The humans escaped just in time, launching themselves into space before the station erupted into chaos. The Xarvok officers, confused and panicked, made the worst decision possible. They abandoned the station. One by one, Sarvok warships jumped into hyperspace, fleeing before the massive human armada could destroy them. By the time they realized there was no real invasion, it was too late. The station was gone. The humans and Zerithians had won. A new kind of war. As the enemy retreated, Voss leaned back in his chair, grinning. "That," he said, "is how humans fight a war." Yelrin, still shocked, turned to Orvix. "We would have never thought of this strategy." Orvix shook his head. "Because we don't fight like them." Yelrin nodded slowly. "No, but maybe we should start." From that day forward, the war changed. The Xarvok, once unstoppable, were no longer invincible. And across the galaxy, one phrase began to spread. The humans are coming. And for the first time in history, the Xarvok were afraid. The Xarvok Empire was furious. For the first time in their history, they had been outsmarted. A mere handful of human and Zerithian ships had forced their fleet to retreat. Their mighty supply station was lost. And worst of all, they had been afraid. The Xarvok were a species built on dominance, a race that thrived on fear and power. They had never considered humans a threat. But now, their warlord spoke of humanity in whispers, as if saying their name too loudly would invite disaster. This was unacceptable. And so, the Xarvok prepared for revenge. A desperate warning. On the bridge of the Vathos, Commander Yelrin stood beside Commander Elias Voss, staring at a disturbing transmission. A Zerithian spy, disguised as a Xarvok officer, had sent a final message before vanishing. The message was simple. The Xarvok are coming, with everything they have. The bridge was silent. Lieutenant Orvik spoke first. They will wipe us out. Yelrin clenched his fists. How many ships? The comms officer's voice was shaky. Sir, at least 50 dreadnoughts. Hundreds of warships. Yelrin's stomach dropped. That was an extinction-level force. There was no escaping this battle. The Xarvok were not just attacking them. They were making an example. Voss, however, was smiling. Orvik stared at him. Are you laughing? Voss chuckled. Oh yeah, this is perfect. Yelrin frowned. Perfect? How is this perfect? Voss turned to them, eyes burning with something the Zerithians did not understand. Excitement. Because Voss said, this means we finally have their attention. The impossible defense. The Zerithian fleet was small. Too small. The human fleet was even smaller. Against 50 dreadnoughts and hundreds of enemy ships, they didn't stand a chance. But Voss, he wasn't thinking about survival. He was thinking about victory. All right, he said, pulling up a map of the star system. We can't run. We can't outgun them. But we can outthink them. Yelrin's officers watched as Voss crafted an insane plan. They would lure the Xarvok into a narrow asteroid belt, forcing them into tight formations where their numbers would be useless. The human and Zerithian ships would use the debris for cover, striking fast and hard, then disappearing before the enemy could retaliate. And finally, they would trigger an artificial gravity collapse, turning the entire battlefield into a death trap. Orvik blinked. That's madness. Voss grinned. No, Lieutenant. That's war. Yelrin sighed. We don't have another choice. We fight. The battle begins. The Xarvok fleet arrived in full force, warping into the system like a storm of fire. Their dreadnoughts glowed red, their weapons charging, ready to wipe out the resistance in minutes. The human and Zerithian fleets were waiting, silent, hidden. Then, just as the Xarvok moved into position, boom! The first ambush strike hit them like lightning. Human bombers swooped in, dropping payloads directly into enemy engines, causing a chain reaction of explosions. The Xarvok roared in anger and turned to fire. But the humans were already gone. Another attack came from the opposite direction, this time from Zerithian cruisers, targeting weapons systems and communication arrays. The Xarvok commanders panicked. This was not how battles were fought. Their ships were too large, too slow to counter the unpredictable human tactics. They fired their cannons into the asteroids, hitting nothing but empty space. And then, the real trap activated. Voss shouted into the comms, "Now, trigger the collapse." Deep within the asteroid field, hidden gravity devices activated, pulling the massive space rocks into sudden, chaotic movement. The Xarvok ships, unable to maneuver, were crushed. Dreadnoughts collided, their own weapons turning against them. The unstoppable fleet, the force meant to erase humanity and the Zerithians, was falling apart. One by one, the enemy ships exploded, destroyed by their own overconfidence. The Xarvok's fear. From the Xarvok command ship, Supreme Warlord Karagzol watched in horror. This was not possible. His people were the dominant force of the galaxy. The Zerithians were supposed to be weak. The humans were supposed to be insignificant. Yet here they were, tearing his fleet apart like hunters slaughtering prey. For the first time in his life, Karagzol felt something new. Fear. Victory against the impossible. As the last Xarvok dreadnought was consumed by flames, the battlefield fell silent. The Zerithian officers stared in shock. They had done the impossible. They had defeated the largest enemy force ever assembled. And it was because of humans. Commander Yelrin turned to Voss, his voice filled with awe. How did you know this would work? Voss leaned against his chair, a smug grin on his face. I didn't. Orcs choked. You mean you? Voss laughed. I took a gamble. And guess what? He gestured toward the debris field, where the Xarvok fleet had once stood. We won. The galaxy will never be the same. News of the human victory spread like wildfire. Across the stars, species who once feared that Xarvok began to hope. Rebellions ignited on occupied worlds. The once invincible empire was on the defensive, and in every dark corner of the universe, a new legend began to rise. When all hope is lost, humanity fights back. And they never lose. The mighty Xarvok fleet, once thought unstoppable, had been broken. Their ships, once symbols of terror, were now floating wreckage, scattered across the asteroid belt. On the bridge of the Vathos, Commander Yelrin stood in stunned silence. His officers, too, were speechless. They had won. But how? How had a small, desperate alliance of humans and Zerithians achieved the impossible? The answer stood right next to him, Commander Elias Voss. The human leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression relaxed. To him, this was just another day in the fight. Yelrin finally spoke. That Xarvok, they ran. Voss grinned. Yeah. And they'll keep running if we do this right. The enemy in retreat. The Xarvok remnants fled into hyperspace, their commanders shaken. In the Central War Command of the Xarvok Empire, Supreme Warlord Karagzol stood before a massive holographic display, watching the defeat unfold. His advisors trembled. They are just humans. One officer shouted. They should not have been able to do this. Karagzol slammed a fist onto the console. Enough. We underestimated them. The room went silent. Karagzol exhaled, his claws tightening. What do we know of humans? A nervous scientist hesitated, then spoke. Humans are different from other species. They are physically weaker than us, yet they adapt faster than any race we've encountered. Their minds are unpredictable. Their tactics are reckless. But the scientist gulped. But they win. Karagzol's eyes narrowed. That is unacceptable. A moment later, a holographic projection of the Xarvok High Council appeared. An elder warlord spoke, his voice cold. We must make an example of them. No more underestimating humans. Karagzol straightened. Then we will burn their homeworld. The threat to Earth. Back on the Vathos, Yelrin and Voss were deep in discussion when a priority transmission interrupted them. The message came from human intelligence. Voss's face darkened as he read it. Oh, hell. Yelrin frowned. What is it? Voss turned to him, his usual smirk gone. The Xarvok are heading for Earth. Silence. Then, chaos. The human officers started yelling, preparing defensive plans. The Zerithians looked at each other in confusion. Orcs turned to Yelrin. Why would they go after Earth? Voss answered, his voice serious. Because we scared them. And when bullies get scared, they try to crush the source of their fear. He looked Yelrin straight in the eye. We just made the Xarvok afraid of humanity. And now they want to wipe us out before we become a real threat. The race against time. The human fleet was too far from Earth. If the Xarvok launched their full force, Earth wouldn't stand a chance. Voss's mind raced. There had to be a way. Then, an idea. He turned to Yelrin. How fast can your fastest ships move? Yelrin blinked. The Swift Claw class can reach Earth in 3 days. Voss grinned. Perfect. We send a warning fleet ahead. Then, we take the fight to them before they even get there. Yelrin hesitated. We just survived one battle. Can we really fight again so soon? Voss's expression hardened. Do we have a choice? Preparing for war. In the next hours, the human and Zerithian forces worked together, assembling everything they had left. They would launch a 2-part mission. A small fleet would race ahead to warn Earth. The main force would intercept the Xarvok fleet before it reached human space. Yelrin watched as human engineers repaired damaged ships at an incredible speed. Despite their losses, they moved with purpose, with determination. He finally understood. Humans never gave up. "Commander Voss," he said, "why do your people fight so hard?" Voss paused, then smiled. "Because when someone tries to take everything from us, we make sure they regret it." A dark promise. The HFY fleet, now reinforced with even stronger warships, moved toward Earth at full speed. On his warship, Supreme Warlord Kargzul watched the stars pass by. He had no doubt that Earth would fall. "The humans think they have won a battle," he muttered, "but they have started a war they cannot survive." He leaned forward. "I will see their world burn. The final stand begins." On the Vathos, Yelrin stood beside Voss, watching as the human fleet prepared for battle once more. This time, it was not just about survival. This time, they were fighting for Earth itself. Voss turned to his crew. "All right, people. The Sarvok think they're gonna wipe us out." His eyes burned with fire. "Let's show them why humanity never dies." As the fleet jumped into hyperspace, heading toward the final confrontation, one thing was clear. This war was not over yet. The stars streaked past as the human and Zerithian fleet rushed toward their final stand. The Xarvok Armada, reinforced and enraged, was already on its way to destroy Earth. Inside the UHS Invictus, Commander Elias Voss stood on the bridge, arms crossed, his gaze locked on the holographic map of the approaching enemy fleet. Commander Yelrin of the Zerithians stood beside him. His people had fought wars before, but never like this, never with everything on the line. Voss exhaled sharply. "This is it." Yelrin nodded. "If we lose here, we won't." Voss's voice was steady, filled with a certainty that even the Zerithian officers couldn't understand. The odds were impossible. The enemy fleet was overwhelming. And yet, Voss still believed they could win. Orcs, standing nearby, whispered to Yelrin, "Humans, they are something else." Yelrin agreed. They were the last hope of the galaxy now. The battle for Earth begins. The Tarvok warfleet arrived first. Hundreds of warships, their massive dreadnoughts casting shadows over Earth, prepared to launch their planet-destroying attack. Supreme Warlord Kargzul sat upon his command throne, watching the blue planet below. He could almost taste the victory. "Prepare the orbital cannons," he ordered. His second-in-command, however, hesitated. "Sir, we have incoming ships." Kargzul frowned. "What ships?" The answer came immediately. The humans had arrived. A fleet, small but determined, burst from hyperspace, weapons glowing with energy. At its head, the UHS Invictus and the Vathos, leading the final charge. Kargzul's eyes narrowed. They came to fight. "Destroy them," he growled. The human counterattack. The battle erupted instantly. The Xarvok fleet fired first, their massive cannons unleashing energy blasts that ripped through space. But the humans and Zerithians were ready. They dodged, weaved, and struck with precision. Unlike the enemy, they did not fight with brute force. They fought with skill, intelligence, and sheer defiance. Human bombers shot through enemy formations, dropping payloads onto vulnerable spots. Zerithian cruisers used their advanced energy shields to block incoming fire, covering the human strike teams. And at the center of it all, Voss led the charge. "This is our home," he shouted through the comms. "We don't back down. We don't break. We fight." The human fleet responded with a thunderous assault, diving straight into the heart of the Tarvok Armada. The moment of decision. Despite their tactics, the battle was brutal. The human fleet was outnumbered 10-1. Zerithian ships were getting torn apart by enemy fire. Even Voss, for the first time, felt the weight of the fight pressing down on him. "We're losing ships fast," Orcs reported. "We can't hold out forever." Voss clenched his jaw. "Then we don't hold. We finish this." Yelrin turned to him. What are you planning? Voss smirked. Something stupid. The human flagship accelerated, heading straight for the Xarvok command ship. What is he doing? Orvix gasped. Yelrin's eyes widened. He was going after Karagzul. The duel of warlords. Inside the Xarvok command ship, Karagzul watched in disbelief as the human flagship broke through his defensive lines. A direct assault on him. Fool, he muttered. Prepare the boarding teams. But before he could react, Voss himself landed with a strike force, blasting through the corridors of the Xarvok warship. Karagzul stood from his throne, rage burning in his eyes. A human had dared to come for him. Voss stepped forward, a laser rifle in hand, surrounded by his best fighters. Nice ship, he said casually. Shame we're about to blow it up. Karagzul growled, drawing his energy blade. You do not understand what you have done, human. Voss smirked. Oh, I understand perfectly. The fall of the Xarvok Empire. The fight was short but brutal. Voss and Karagzul clashed in the command chamber, their blades and weapons striking with deadly force. But in the end, humanity's resilience won. Karagzul fell, his command throne collapsing behind him. The Xarvok fleet, leaderless and disoriented, began to falter. And then, the final strike. Yelrin's fleet, now united with Earth's defenses, pushed the enemy back. One by one, the Xarvok ships fell. The last survivors flowed into hyperspace, their once mighty empire shattered. The war was over. Humanity had won. A new legend begins. As the smoke cleared, Earth remained standing. The human fleet, damaged but victorious, returned home. On the bridge of the Vathos, Yelrin turned to Voss. It's over. Voss grinned. Not yet. Yelrin frowned. What do you mean? Voss looked out at the stars. The Xarvok weren't just a threat to Earth. They were a threat to everyone. He crossed his arms. And I don't know about you, but I'm not waiting for them to come back. We take the fight to them. Orvix blinked. You mean? Voss smirked. We're not done yet. The legacy of humanity. The battle was over, but the war had changed forever. The Xarvok Empire was no longer feared. The Zerithians were no longer alone. And humanity. They had gone from an unknown species to the most dangerous force in the galaxy. Because now, every empire, every warlord, every enemy knew one thing. When all hope is lost, humanity arrives. And they never lose. The age of humanity had begun.